Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran Chicago-based jazz musician and composer, the great Ken Vandermark. He grew up in Massachusetts, and as a kid in Boston, his father gave him a charmed jazz life of seeing legends like Art Blakey and so many others. Since the 1990s, he's been a firm fixture on the Chicago area music scene, earning decades of critical praise for his playing and multi-layered compositions. He opened up about his long, fruitful life in music, the COVID-19 life, and so much more. Enjoy.
So how are you surviving this thrilling episode called Life and COVID since March of 2020?
Well, it's been kind of a roller coaster. I mean, 2020 was especially difficult in regards to music because very quickly everything shut down for, so many people in so many different professions and in life in general for most of that year. I mean, there was exceptions, but I know for me, I had actually two performances with other people, one outside in the summer, recording a concert for a streamed festival, and then an outdoor duo in September, also for a music festival, but the concerts were all outside to, spaced audiences and whatnot. And normally I spend about 6 months a year on tour doing shows. So to have like two concerts with other people in a year, it was pretty devastating. More than just the music part, but like the social part, the inspiration part. I get so much out of touring, in addition to the opportunities to play, but the privilege to meet other people, travel to other places, the amount of creative input I get from doing that. That was massive. It happened literally overnight when COVID, it became clear how dramatic and severe the pandemic was going to be. I was already about to start a tour with Paul Whitton, who had come from Europe, a drummer, English drummer, legendary improviser, Wooly, an incredible trumpet player based in the New York area. And we were going to do a tour together as a trio. Paul Whitton had already arrived from Europe and was in Chicago. And then it was like clear. We were still going to go forward with the tour because it wasn't apparent how severe everything was going to be. This was like March. I think that Paul and I played a duo gig, I think on March 13th. We canceled the tour. And then the most immediate thing was trying to get Paul out of the country before things shut down, because the ex-president, said no one could come from Europe, and it was clear that the EU would follow suit for Americans because of that. Or people traveling from the States. So we bought a last-minute ticket to fly Paul home from Chicago and got him out on Saturday, and there were no problems at all. But on Sunday, there were thousands of people at O'Hare Airport trying to get out of the country. So we just got him out in time, and being in an airport with thousands of people, with holdups of more than 7 hours to try to get on planes, in the middle of a starting pandemic here, that would have been catastrophic. It was like an overnight thing, and since then it's been just one adjustment after another to try to keep things moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest thing. It's just kind of an observer and someone that loves music, is that, you see all these stadiums full of people for sports, and all of these things kind of have their way of kind of opening up. And it's like the world of entertainment, and more specifically, music and jazz, has just kind of been pushed back, and it's been devastating. But my question to you is, over this time, what did you learn about yourself that maybe you didn't realize before that's going to make you stronger as we do reemerge and get back to it in 2022?
Well, I agree with you. Things are improving. 2021 was better than 2020. I was able to get to Europe and tour for 6 weeks in the fall of last year. And I feel that the spring will be something like that. It'll be better than 2021. There'll be more activity, more concerts. And like in Chicago right now, it was kind of a gap with Omicron where I think a lot of scheduled concerts have been postponed, but shows are starting to happen now with Omicron kind of hopefully phasing out quickly. So I have a lot of optimism going forward. It's still tricky because I had work in January and February that was scheduled and then canceled, and I'm hoping that the work that's scheduled in March will take place. So I feel optimistic, but it's still, like I said, kind of a roller coaster emotionally, just like putting so much work into all the planning. I mean, it's not just the concert, it's all the preparatory work, practicing material, getting ready to play. I mean, there's so many things that go into just one concert that when it gets canceled, it's really a setback from a logistical standpoint, but also from a mental standpoint. So to answer your question, to get through it, it took a lot of discipline to just keep working on music. I mean, the main thing that was possible through definitely during 2020 for me was solo material. So I worked really hard in developing a new format for myself to work on solo performances. Made a record of that during 2020. And that gave me something to focus on and develop, which was really important. But in terms of what I learned about myself, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I have always been, I mean, as much as I can, been trying to tour and work on performing for audiences and with other musicians as much as I can. And I've always loved it. I mean, it inspires me. So much of what I do comes out of being on the road. You know, I'm frequently asked, like, how can you be out so long? And doesn't it exhaust you? And actually, I'm not tired when I'm on tour because I'm getting so much creative feedback, you know, working on things, discovering things, meeting people and places. So I was quite aware of the privilege I had to get to do that, and I really cherished it. But to have it, you know, impossible to do that work for basically 2 years. I mean, I didn't really resume to normal activity, quote unquote, more normal activity until September of last year. So that was a solid, you know, 18 months plus of not really playing concerts at all. It made me appreciate the significance of the social aspect of what I do. I mean, both the collaborations with the musicians, but also the interaction with people. I mean, you talked about the devastation to the club scene. I mean, going to a venue, meeting people there, performing with them. I mean, improvised music is such how to put it, it's so spontaneous and it's so in the moment that it's an extremely intimate process of playing music and the audience listening to it. Everyone's connected in a very direct way. I mean, I think that's true with all music, but especially for music that's made in real time. Everyone's focused on a very specific set of materials in a way that's unique to jazz and improvised music. That process of playing, but also before and after the concerts, of interacting with people and what's shared there, I realized how significant that was for me and how significant the traveling and inspiration I got from traveling. You know, I mean, I was in Chicago within walking distance of my house for, you know, a year and a half. I mean, I didn't leave within the blocks of where I lived. And for someone who spent so much time traveling to other countries around the world, that I still don't think I've processed that. I mean, I think when I met a lot of musicians at a festival in Austria, the Music Unlimited Festival in November, I saw people I hadn't seen for 2 years. A ton of musicians there that I work with and know very well, and we were all looking at each other like it's been 2 years. Like, we could not process that. You know, and before COVID, I mean, time would fly, and you'd be like, oh, we haven't seen each other for a little while. But 2 years is a very significant amount of time. And it felt like some black hole had taken place between March of 2020 and November of 2021. And for that to happen, like, a lot had to be mentally and emotionally shut down. I think everybody, whatever they did and whatever career they have, whatever they pursue in life, I mean, you had to shut down so many things to get through what had been taken away. And I discovered all that during the process of trying to make it through this period. And we're still in it. I mean, there's still a ways to go, but I'm very optimistic that this is going to be a better year for everybody.
Speaking of that optimism, you know, the one thing that this pandemic gave musicians was that time to maybe work on projects and to get new material out. So along with new material possibly in 2022, how does your itinerary start to look hopeful as we kind of expand into the new year?
And like I said, in March, I'm supposed to go to the Big Ears Festival in Knoxville, and that's a huge event. It's with the Dal Niente New Music Ensemble, and we're performing a piece composed by Roscoe Mitchell, and I'll be doing some other performances while I'm there. And then I go to Europe to play with a trio and do a short tour there and come back. And then April, I've got U.S. touring with the actually the trio that I mentioned that was supposed to play in March of 2020. We rescheduled that tour for April in the United States with Paul Whitton and Nate Woolley, and then I go with Paul to Europe and tour with a new quartet with István Grenczko, a Hungarian saxophonist, and Elizabeth Harnick, a pianist from Austria. So it just jumps back in, and that group's supposed to record an album while we're there. The duo I have with Nate Woolley, we're releasing a record to coincide with the U.S. tour in April. So like things are basically jumping back in to the kind of activity I was doing before.
So let's kind of go back to the beginnings of your life. Talk to me a little bit about your childhood and how you got that flashpoint and jazz became your focus.
Well, I'm kind of unique. maybe that's overstating it, but I had an unusual childhood because I grew up in a household where we listened to jazz all the time. My father's a fanatic about the music, and music in general, but jazz in particular, improvised music in particular. So from the time before I can remember, I was going to concerts of the music, hearing the music all day at home. I mean, my father played records all day long when he was home. So I just grew up in that environment, and I'm a little unusual in that case, in that sense, because like I'm 57. People my age and older who play this music very often come to it not from a jazz background, but through listening to, let's say, rock music or some other kind of music, and they become curious about jazz and improvisation, and they kind of get to it from a different point of view, which is super cool, but is different than growing up in that environment. So I was really fortunate to be around it. And, I don't know exactly why, but I was fascinated by it as a kid. And so my father, recognizing that, started taking me to jazz clubs in the Boston area all the time. We'd go see shows, 3 nights a week, and then I'd go to school the next morning. But I saw amazing stuff. I mean, Art Blakey all the time, Savvy Lewis, a stride pianist, played at the Copley Plaza Hotel once a week, and we would go see him play all the time. I mean, I saw so much stuff. Just grew up in that environment. I mean, Johnny Griffin countless times, and all that music had a huge impact on me. And I just loved it. Like, I really got the idea of improvisation pretty quickly and understood that when we would see the same band, like let's say we saw Blakey's band, we'd see it 3 times that week at a club. I saw really quickly, like, they'd play the same tunes, but then they would be doing all these different things with them, the next night and the night after. And I, without having it, like, explained to me, I was extremely curious about that and started talking about it and asking questions about it with my dad. And he started, he knew enough about music to kind of explain the basic principles of form and how they were working with the chord changes and the cycles and the formats and whatnot. So I got into it really young, and I was really lucky to be around all that stuff and meet the musicians. They loved, I met Papa Joe Jones at a club called Lulu White's, and he was so gracious to me. I was a little kid. I don't know, I was like 12 or 11. I don't know, maybe younger even, and he was just so kind to me. And I just, so I was around all that stuff. And so that I carry that with me. It's part of my history.
How did you land in Chicago, and what was that migration from Boston to Chicago like?
Well, I went to school in Montreal and studied film and communications, and moved back to Boston after that in 1986, and I was there for a few years and played my own music, had some bands there that I worked with and performed in the Boston area. And I just got the feeling like I wanted to try something else. I had a sense of what the scene was like, and at that time in the 80s, the scene in the Boston area was just tremendous. Like, there's so many people coming through, lots of musicians, all the time from New York. I got to see like people like Don Cherry and Ed Blackwell play 2 nights as a duo in a small club. I mean, that stuff was going on all the time. So things were really happening in Boston during that period. But I had a friend who I played music with in Montreal. He was from Chicago, and he was a drummer. And I had visited him a couple times and was fascinated by the city. And I looked at the arts. They used to have weekly arts papers. It was the Phoenix in Boston and the Chicago Reader. And here, I looked at the music listings, and it was like 10 times. It felt like 10 times the amount of clubs and activity that was in Boston was taking place in Chicago. And especially someone working with improvised music, I looked at like all the jazz clubs and whatnot. I was like, oh my God, there's so much going on here. So I thought about coming to Chicago. I thought about going to New York City. And I thought a little bit about San Francisco because in the 80s there was a really happening scene there too. And I decided on Chicago because, I knew some people here. I think that was the main reason. And when I got to Chicago, the first 2 years were brutal for me. I mean, I've been doing work in Boston, but I was having a really hard time finding people that I clicked with musically. I played with some different folks, but it always folded and it never went forward. And I was really about to actually move back to Boston in the beginning of '92. I was going to move back, and I had just started playing with Kent Kessler and Michael Zarang in a quartet. And Michael Zarang said, hey, why don't you stick around for a year? We just started this band. Let's see what happens. And that was a pivotal decision. I mean, I decided to stay, and things really started to open up at that point in the beginning of '92. And obviously, it was a good choice.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, and speaking of all of these cats that you've had the chance to play with over the years, you've played with a lot of big shots and veterans and luminaries. What have you learned from them? What did you and do you learn from them that you in turn teach younger players that you get around?
I've got to say I've been unbelievably fortunate in terms of the activity I've had and who I've been able to meet and play with. I mean, there's so many artists that I've been. I mean, I don't think about it a lot because I'm such a fan of the music too that when I start thinking about working with Fred Anderson, working with Peter Brotzman, getting a chance to hang out with Han Benig. I'm just picking random things. There's so many folks. It's kind of hard for me to process sometimes, and I feel very, very lucky for all that. And all the artists, there's this really huge misunderstanding, I think, with a lot of the general public that artists and musicians and anybody in creative fields like that, we don't work hard, we hang out, things come our way. I mean, it's this kind of, I don't know anybody who works harder than musicians and artists and writers and the people that I know in the world of arts. I mean, and being around folks that have done it longer than me and working with them, I mean, you see how much it takes. And if you want to do it, you got to do it. You have to be in it and work on it on a daily basis. I mean, when I got to work with Fred Anderson, I mean, that guy he practiced every day at the Velvet Lounge. That was his rehearsal space. In a sense, and he was quite a bit older than me when I was working with him, but he had such a humble and generous perspective towards so many people. You saw why that was so important, how much positive energy and creativity came out of being generous with time and working together to make things happen. So I was really, I mean, as a young person, before as a kid I was playing music, but before I made the decision to devote myself to music, which took place when I was in college, I said, this is what I want to do, and just committed to it. Even as a kid, before that decision, I saw how amazing these individuals were. And they were truly individuals. They had their own way of playing with their own way of living, and being around that energy, it was like, that's what I want to do. And then when I started playing and playing with people my age, my peers, let's say, and then starting to, do more work with people older than me who seemed excited to work with me and let me into their worlds. It just emphasized everything that I was seeing already. It emphasized why the commitment was worth it, because so much came back from it. That's why I talked a little bit earlier about, how difficult it's been to get through this period of COVID, because so much comes back from the activity. As much as you devote to it comes back, and it comes back exponentially, which perpetuates the energy to keep going. And so the people that that I've been around who help guide me, that's a major thing. And also the idea of the tradition of the music, which gets talked about a lot. That tradition is about individuality and innovation, not about perpetuating the past. And all the people, that's really that's the history of the music. When you look at it, it's about, new ideas happening, different perspectives being developed, and that's the tradition. And I've been around people who illustrate that every day they live, and I've done it for decades more than I have. So that motivates me to find my own voice, motivates me to find my own things that I can contribute. Because that's what matters most is contribute, and you can belong to the whole history and all the people working. That's what we're looking for, is people to contribute on some level. And thankfully, many people do.
So over your career, too, you've been recognized, you've gotten awards, and I'm curious, I don't want to know, your favorite one. That's never a fair question. But what one surprised you the most? What recognition or award did you get that was just, out of left field, you didn't expect it?
Well, without a doubt, the MacArthur Prize. I had no idea. I don't know exactly the process now, but when I got the prize, you didn't know you were up for it. People nominated you, and then the MacArthur Foundation would kind of follow what you were doing over the course of a year without you knowing it, which is kind of a bit mysterious. But that's what they did. And then I was actually on tour in the States with the Vandermark 5, and we had a long drive from South Carolina to North Carolina in the pouring rain. And it was still pouring rain when we got to the club, and we unloaded all our equipment, and it was soaking wet. And the guy around the venue said, "Hey, you got a phone call. There's a cell phone in the hallway." And I'm like, man, who? I was so stressed out. We were late to the gig. There were already people in the audience waiting for us to play. We're soaking wet. And I got to the phone. I said, "Yeah, hello, who is this?" And they were like, someone on the phone said, "Hi, this is the MacArthur Foundation. Do you have a minute?" And I thought it was a prank call. I was like, "Yeah, seriously, I have a gig to play and I'm late. Who is this?" And then they convinced me who it was, and that was obviously I was stunned, And I actually didn't really believe it was true 100%, because they were like, you can't say anything about it until, we let you know, except your family. Because they had to find everybody, because there's scientists that are out in the Amazon investigating stuff. They are scattered all over the place, and etc. So until it was really announced in the newspapers, I didn't really believe it. So that was a complete. That night after they told me, I was sleeping on someone's floor, looking at the ceiling, lying on a rug, and kind of was in complete disbelief. So that was. Yeah, I would put that at the top.
Absolutely. So, you've been on stage with a lot of cats. You've probably seen a lot of shows, as you mentioned, Art Blakey, growing up, so many things. But is there anybody in the world of jazz right now that you would love to catch live that you haven't seen?
That's a really good question. I've seen so many folks, and a lot of the folks that I would have loved to see, unfortunately, have passed on, That's a tough question. One person I'd like to see and spend time with, who I have met, but I would really love to just share time with, is Anthony Braxton. He's like a central figure in my life, and I've met him a few times, and he's always been unbelievably generous and inspiring. And he was one of the key reasons I stayed in Chicago, because I went to a series of lectures he did in Champaign-Urbana, and he encouraged me to keep playing, which made me believe in myself at a time when I was incredibly discouraged in that 2-year period where I was really butting my head against the wall. So I owe Anthony Braxton an immense amount. Somebody who I wish that I had met that I didn't have a chance to was Mulhall Richard Abrams, who I feel is just such an important figure in the history of the music. And I think so much of what the AACM accomplished and still accomplishes is based on his activity and his role as a leader in that organization, a creative mentor for so many artists that I revere. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's what comes to mind.
No, that's a wonderful answer. Yeah. So, everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but obviously you're living your life. You have a perception of yourself. Who do you think you are?
That's a good question. I guess I don't think about it too much because I'm just living in it, I guess I'm a workaholic, and thankfully I'm working on something that's incredibly creative and inspiring, and not destructive, so I feel I'm very curious and very passionate about music, both as like I said, a fan and a listener. I mean, I listen to music all day long at home and on tour. Even aside from the music I'm making, it's my life, it really has changed my life so thoroughly that what I do is who I am. It's not like I'm a musician part-time and then I do other things. It's like I'm a musician 24 hours. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating, but the fact is, I dream about it. I just had, and probably right now because so much has been shut down, I have dreams about being on tour, I just had a dream, like 2 days ago about being in an airport and trying to get to the plane on time. It's there's no separation between music and myself. And I guess that's how I would define myself, as a musician.
Beautiful. Ken, hey man, it's been great to catch up with you. I've been wanting to talk to you for many years, so I really appreciate your time. I'm a big fan. Good luck as we move forward. I hope everything starts getting better for everybody.
I agree, Joe, and thanks so much for your patience in getting in touch with me, and I'm glad we had the chance to talk, and because I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Boston, Chicago, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Ken for his class, cool, and time. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.